say something. Check.
Kevin, your other option would be to, you could call in using the dial-in number.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Here we go. All right, good.
I got
So,
computer.
being 6:31, I'll call the meeting of the Oregon School District Board of Education to order. Today is Monday, July 13th. We are participating remotely. And so Katie, would you call call the roll?
Ms. Garrison,
Yes.
Mr. Mehring,
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan,
Here.
Mr. Pankratz,
Here.
Ms. Bijak,
I'm here. Sorry, I was muted.
Mr. LeBrun,
Here.
Mr. Zach.
Present. Board has a quorum. I've confirmed that all the board members can hear each other and we can hear them. All members should have received the packet. If any board member did not have the packet of materials, let me know right now. Otherwise, I'll assume you did for the meeting. Okay, Katie, would you make sure the minutes reflect the fact that everybody can be heard and everybody has the packets for the evening? Katie and I have examined the proof of notice of meeting, and it's been properly posted according to Wisconsin open meetings law. Our agenda tonight has our standard format. For action items, we will hear from Andy on 2019-2020 budget adjustments, which is a standard agenda item at this time of year to true up our accounts for our CPA audit. And then for information, we're going to hear from report on our committees. And then informational items, we'll have a return to school plan update from Leslie and an opportunity for the board to weigh in at that point in time. 2020-2021 budget update from Andy, a Woods update, and then a discussion briefly about the organization structure for oversight of that. And then the board will be going into closed session at the conclusion of our meeting to discuss the evaluation process that we're going to utilize for Dr. Bergstrom. We will not be going into open session after that. So what we'll do is before we sign out of this meeting, we'll move to closed session and then we'll all sign off, and then board members, you have your separate link then that we'll get back on. Okay? With that, I would need a motion to approve the agenda as posted.
This is Krista. I'll move approval of the agenda.
Is there a
This is
second?
Troy. Troy, I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, could you call the roll, Katie?
Ms. Flanagan,
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz,
Yes.
Ms. Garrison,
Yes.
Mr. Mehring,
Yes.
Ms. Bijak,
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun,
Yes.
Mr. Zach.
Yes, we have an agenda. First item on the agenda is the consent calendar. Is there any item on the consent calendar that any board member wishes to remove? Okay, seeing none, I will entertain a motion to approve the items on the consent calendar.
This is Tim. I move the items on the consent calendar.
Is there a second?
This is Anna. I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. I've indicated to the board that I'm going to, per our protocol, vote on the consent calendar in favor of all items, except I will be abstaining with respect to any vote for Bridget Finnell, who is the request is to appoint her or hire her as a teacher at Forest Edge. Bridget is a daughter. I previously received legal advice that while I could vote on that matter because she does not get support from me and therefore does not bring into play Chapter 19, that for purposes of making sure that there's no appearance of impropriety, I'm going to abstain from that vote. Okay? Therefore, Katie, would you call the roll on the items of the consent calendar?
Mr. LeBrun,
Yes.
Ms. Bijak,
Yes.
Ms. Garrison,
Yes.
Mr. Mehring,
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan,
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz. Mr. Pankratz,
Yes.
Mr. Zock.
Yes, with the exception of the abstention as noted. Motion are the items on the consent calendar carry. Takes us to revised agenda B, information items, comments received from the public regarding the agenda. Katie, did you receive anything in advance of tonight's meeting?
I did not.
OEA report. Laura, are you on and do you have anything to report? Or Jason?
I am on. I'm going to pass it over to Nate. He just has a quick statement.
Great. Hi, Nate.
So first off, I just wanted to say thank you again for the ongoing inclusion of t-shirts in the planning process for this fall. We know that's not happening everywhere, and we really appreciate that our district has all voices included in that process. We just wanted to reiterate our hope that in the continuing conversations about planning for this coming school year, that issues of health, safety, and workplace conditions for teachers and all staff are included in the conversations about how we're making decisions for this upcoming fall. We trust that that is going to happen, but we just wanted to reiterate that we hope and expect that that'll be part of the conversations.
Great. Thank you. And I, in addition to the committees that our staff are working on, I know we have had ongoing conversations with OEA leadership at our leaders meeting with Dr. Bergstrom and myself. So that's an important voice for us to hear, and we've been listening all along. So thank you, Nate. Thank you, Laura, for the comments and for your ongoing information that you're supplying to us as we make decisions. And we're going to hear more from that from Dr. Bergstrom in a minute. I don't think we have any of our new students on yet, I think, right, Katie? Okay, we'll bring them on as we get closer to the school year and I can meet with them. All right, that takes us to action items. The first item and the only item is the 2019-2020 budget adjustments. Andy, the floor is yours. Oh, before we go there, I'm sorry, Andy, I forgot to mention with respect to the consent calendar items, we had a number of donations and I like to just at least highlight those at a meeting because they are so generous. Pure Integrity Homes with another donation, this time of $1,000 for their scholarship. Oregon Area Educational Foundation with $2,500 for a cool grant. Daniel and Maureen Coyle, $100 for the Netherwood Knoll Arboretum. Robert Nadjuk and Stephanie Knudsen, $100 for the A-Team Scholarship. The Oregon Area Educational Foundation is about $1,900 for 2019-2020 Avid Tutors. Oregon Preschool, $400 for the Oregon Brooklyn Splash Pad. Oregon Cares, $200 for the summer lunch adult meals. And then American Heart Association, a $500 donation for the Kids Heart Challenge. Thank you to all of you who so generously donated to our district. Andy, now it's you.
Thanks, Mr. Zock. Yeah, this is an agenda item that we typically do every July, and it's basically is a response to one of the processes that our auditors do when they go through our budget at the end of the year. And there is a requirement for them to basically go through and look at functional areas. So our account string is very, very long, but the functional area is one of those areas in the budget that allows us to spend money in for a certain purpose. And basically the auditor needs to tell the district if we expend over in a certain functional area every year as a note in the audit. So one of the things that we've done as a practice is we kind of move some money around at the end of the year to make sure that we don't exceed in any functional area. So that's the only purpose of this agenda item, is to kind of move funds around so that we don't exceed any functional area. Now, that said, we're going to be talking later in the board meeting a little bit about what we think we're going to be actually having money left over from this year for next year, or I'm sorry, from last year into this year for purposes of dealing with the COVID situation. So if you look at the budget adjustments, you'll see that it shows expenditures actually exceeding revenues in our Fund 10 budget. That's not actually going to be the case. But we continue to basically show that just as a matter of being able to show that we didn't exceed any of the functional areas. So that's kind of convoluted, and I apologize for that. But the main purpose of this wasn't really to show what our revenues and expenses were anticipated to do, because the problem with that is we still have bills coming in at this point in time. I actually approved several tens of thousands this morning. So we're still kind of processing through last year. And so we won't be really done with that toward the end of this month before we cut that all off for bills that were actually incurred last year. So this is just simply a way to make sure that we don't expend over in those functional areas within the budget. Does that make any sense at all?
This is Heather. No.
Okay.
All right, new board member. You're going to have to say more than that, or do a little bit of a different summary, please. I read it.
I will.
I'm listening, but I don't quite follow.
Okay. So the only purpose for this agenda item basically is to make sure we don't expend in one functional area over what we originally had budgeted in October. So in order to do that, and we only had a couple of functional areas where we were close to doing that. So we just moved some money in those functional areas. But our differential, I use the word differential, our differential between revenues and expenses for this last year is the same differential that was happening, that was approved back in October. And the reason there's a differential is something called carryover. And basically carryover is a term that we've come up with over the years, basically to show that if a school or a department doesn't spend all their money in one particular year, they are allowed to carry that money over. So we allow them to spend that money the following year. So that explains the differential. And all we are doing now is just kind of moving dollars around a little bit so that we don't spend more than we originally had planned to do in October in any functional area. So we moved some monies around, and in the agenda item, it kind of talks about those couple areas that we did that. We took out, and we did actually take some money out for instance, the school construction home. We took out revenues and expenses, but the differential is still the differential that was in place in October.
Hey, Heather, if you turn to page 4 of that handout, which is the notice of alteration in the expenditure budget.
Yep.
And you go to General Fund 10, for example, you look at physical curriculum, that's a expenditure item. Our original budget had us propose to spend $1,367,000. We're actually going to spend $1,434,000, give or take, okay? And we need to reallocate our budget numbers to align with what we've actually spent so that we don't get a note in our audit, okay?
So we're literally just moving money around.
Correct.
We're moving money around within the budget in order to cover all the areas so we don't overexpend in one area.
Yeah.
I was with you on the math part. It's just some of the vocabulary you use was not clear. I got it now.
Yep. And it's an accounting function really, and it doesn't impact the bottom line numbers that we've spent or received.
That's all I needed to hear. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Anybody else with that was a good question. Anybody with any other questions of Andy?
Yeah, I have a question. So we had some of the unspent money from last year carry over into this year, and we're carrying that again. Are we reducing that? In other words, spending more than we normally would have spent to spend down some of that carryover this year?
Some areas, yes. Not
Anything significant?
The two largest significant areas are actually going to happen this summer. We were trying to kind of have them happen before June 30th, but they're not going to. So not this year, but next year. Those two areas were playgrounds at Netherwood Knoll and additional one-to-one laptops or Chromebooks at the high school. Both of those orders will happen this summer.
After the first of the new calendar or new fiscal year.
Correct.
Okay, and so the total of those two things is money we will be spending of our carryover. And what is that total?
The total amount of the carryover?
No, the total amount that we will spend on those two things.
Approximately 200,000.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from board members? I think I got you all tiled. Seeing none, then I would need a motion to approve the revised 2019-2020 budget as presented by Andy.
I'll make that motion. This is Troy.
Is there a second?
Second that, it's Tim.
Tim with the second. Is there any discussion? Okay, I don't see any from the board members. Katie, would you call the roll?
Mr. Pankratz,
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun,
Yes.
Ms. Garrison,
Yes.
Mr. Maring,
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan,
Yes.
Ms. Bijak,
Yes.
Mr. Zach.
Yes, the budget is amended as proposed. Andy, thank you, and we anticipate an audit with no notes.
We will do our best.
All right. That takes us to discussion items, committee reports, policy, and that would be Anna.
Thanks, Steve. I actually don't have much to report. We have not met since our last meeting as a board, but we are looking to be sending out a doodle poll here shortly to get one scheduled for late July or early August. So that meeting will be hopefully scheduled in the next couple of weeks.
Terrific, thanks. Visioning Troy.
We met last Thursday, July 9th at 7:45 a.m. We had 3 agenda topics. The first one was to select a board, common board text for reading. The second agenda item was to look at objectives for the 2020 school year. And then the third agenda item was to prepare the agenda for the upcoming board and administrator workshop. So regarding items number 2 and 3, the full board will be receiving an email from Dr. Bergstrom with some homework, some background material to refresh ourselves as we move into the workshop to prepare for setting those objectives for next year. We're also at the workshop, we're planning to revisit policy 41102, which is the graduation requirements, to kind of take the first step in looking at that. And then should we determine that we want to further make changes to that, that would be referred to the policy committee. I think that about covers it. Like I said, I look for just a heads up to look for that email from Dr. Bergstrom, and over the next couple of weeks prior to the workshop, be ready to do a little refresher reading on that material.
Can I ask a quick question about the book study?
Yes.
Are we going to have a deadline for when we want that read by, or certain chapters which we by?
Yeah, good question, Anna. I should have mentioned that. And Dr. Bergstrom or other committee members, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we wouldn't have the first discussion until October timeframe. We wanted to get through that first month of school. We did not feel that we would have enough time to undertake that discussion at the workshop in a couple of weeks. We have a pretty full agenda with that workshop without introducing that book study. So yeah, we'll have a few months to get through that book. And I should also mention that we are recommending a video as well. It's the 13th short video or short film. So.
Great, thank you.
And also those books for the book study, those are going to be ordered centrally and sent out, right?
Correct. Thank you, Tim.
I already have mine. I've already started it. I'm overachieving right now.
Yes, you are.
Got you down for overachieving.
Humble about it, too.
Good for you. Good for you. And the workshop will be on the 26th, right, Troy?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. That's correct, I think.
And we're going to do that at the Innovation Center. The 7 board members will be there in person, and we'll have the administrators that are comfortable being there, the DO office administrators that are comfortable being there. We'll be socially distanced as we were, similar to when we had the special meeting for approving the sale of or the purchase of the property out in Fitchburg. But if anybody's not comfortable being there in person, we're also going to have remote capability for that. Okay, board members. So,
Steve, sorry, I do have it as Monday, July 27th.
27th. That's right. It's 2 weeks from today.
2 weeks from today.
2 weeks from today on the 27th at the Innovation Center, unless you want to participate remotely, and then just let us know. Okay. Anything else, Troy?
Nope, that covers it.
Anybody have any questions regarding those committees? Seeing none, we'll go to the information items, and that's a return to school plan update. And Dr. Bergstrom, I think you're on. Okay. And you're there all alone, aren't you? At the Innovation Center.
I'm all alone, and that is why I really hope that because I am alone in a public space, I'm able to take off my mask. If other people were in me, that wouldn't be an option. But because I'm alone, I'm taking that off. So I just wanted to talk a little bit tonight about potential plans for the fall. And there, everybody can see that okay?
Can everybody hear Leslie? Okay, you got to be a little bit louder, Leslie, or get closer. You're a little distance from the mic.
Is that a little better?
A lot better. That's good.
Awesome.
You're good. Yeah, we can hear you good now. Thanks. Go ahead, Leslie.
All right, so the presentation this evening will be in 4 parts. The first is the guiding principles and the working structure we've been using as a district, possible pathways for the fall, next steps as we see them, and then an opportunity for people to ask questions and give us things that we should continue to consider. So, our guiding principles. As we're facing the prospect of what the fall will look like, we recognize that all of these principles are very important and they're all highly interdependent. Like many other issues, this is complex and all of the pieces must fit together, and all of the pieces apply to our students, our staff, and our families. So as you can see in the center of this is our 5 values, because everything we do is about our 5 values. And we might want to say we start every initiative or project on the basis of our values, but this is much bigger than an initiative or a project. This is how we will operate and keep our community safe. So the 5 values are our starting point, and we really highlighted the value of equity because in this particular situation, when we're talking about how instruction is delivered and we're talking about safety issues, equity needs to be at the forefront. Related to health and safety, we can't reiterate enough that the health and safety of our community is paramount. And plans will reflect national, state, and local health partners with an emphasis on the local. Because public health of Madison-Dane County, they are the ones who are supplying the data and the guidance and the requirements for school districts within the county. And it's really important when you're thinking of health and safety to understand that surrounding counties are not getting the same level of guidance from public health. Consequently, if you're hearing about schools in Sauk or Jefferson or Dodge counties doing things differently, that's because they are not operating under the same local public health guidance. It's an important piece. In addition to health and safety, we have to be considering mental health. of our students, our staff, our families, and social emotional learning, and the importance of all of that as we're designing a plan for the fall. In addition to the fact that we are about learning, so a high quality education has to be what we're offering no matter what the scenario the fall brings. And then finally, we will all need to be flexible and adaptable, because really the only thing we can all count on is that the fall will not look the same. So we will need to continue to be flexible and adaptable as the year moves forward. And we'll talk a little bit more about what I mean specifically in just a moment. So then I'll move on to how we have formed committee structures. So the district office administrative team is functioning as a steering committee for the overall reopening plan. We meet twice a week to discuss updates related to the committees that are being facilitated throughout the district. The academic planning, mental health and social emotional learning. John Tanner and Darcy Krieger are facilitating the committees that come under academic planning. Candace Widensee is facilitating the committees under mental health and social emotional learning. Andy Weiland is facilitating under operations, Gina Jonan for human resources, and Erica for communication. And academic planning, mental health, operations all have staff members who are a part of the committee process. Our staff members are serving on all aspects of those committees because there are several underneath each of those categories. And we will be having focus groups in the next month to continue to vet our protocols and plans, community focus groups, because we also want to have our parents have a real intimate look into what will be happening and give us input in addition to the surveys that we're planning. So when we're talking about sources of guidance, I've already mentioned the importance of public health of Madison-Dane County, because they are the ones who will be giving us not only guidance, but requirements. And that's a very important distinction, because they may give us guidance, but when they give us requirements, that means we must adhere to what they're saying. And that's part of the reason that we haven't been doing a lot of surveying about the fall up until this point. We wanted to be able to be really clear to our families and to our staff about what options are available to us, given the parameters that public health gives us. However, public health has delayed giving parameters because our Dane County data has not gone in the direction people are hoping. So every week, as superintendents gather with public health, because we are in twice weekly communication with them, they've been very good partners. But when we gather with them, we often are told that the guidance is coming the next week because they need to do continued analyzation. And they remind us frequently that opening schools in Dane County or creating a plan for the fall is one thing that they do that impacts an extremely large number of people. And consequently, they're giving it the thought and attention it deserves. So in addition to public health, you can see we are looking at a variety of resources that are out there that are important to inform our thinking. And we also, as I mentioned, I am regularly meeting with other Dane County superintendents to ensure that we are all working on the same set of information and we are thinking through problems in as collaborative of a manner as possible. I'll go to the next slide. Possible pathways for reopening. So I want to make sure everybody understands that the term phrase, possible pathways, was chosen very intentionally. Anyone who's listening tonight, I want to make sure that they understand that we cannot say at this point in time what the fall will look like, as the guidance from public health is critical in whatever option is chosen. However, I think that given all of the delays in this process, it's a really important time for the board and for the staff and for our families to be able to look at what's possible and give their input. So as we're looking at the fall, here are some of the things that are within the realm of possibility. The first is in-person, face-to-face learning, which means learning would occur in our physical classrooms with accommodations for distancing, disinfecting, and symptom monitoring. And on July 1st, my very first day as the official superintendent in Oregon, Dane County Superintendent submitted a letter to Public Health primarily based off the guidance from the American Academy of Pediatrics related to the importance of getting our students back into school. Because if any of you have read the paper that came from the AAP, it was really about the idea that the benefits to our students getting back into school outweighed the risks. However, since July 1st, as you're watching the news, you know that things on July 13th are different than they were on July 1st. An optimism we may have felt on July 1st, we may be feeling less of on July 13th. Because as you're monitoring our Dane County data, the trend isn't a positive one for the most part. Consequently, things are changing very rapidly, and I'm very concerned that fully in-person learning is becoming something in our rearview mirror. And I'm sure that the next couple of weeks will tell, although I am also told that Public Health should be coming out with their recommendation and guidance, or the requirements and guidance, this week. So I'm eagerly awaiting and consistently refreshing all my news feeds in case it pops to the front before I am able to see it on my email. So I'm a little obsessive, but that's because so much hinges on what they're telling us. The second option is that which is possibly significantly more likely for the fall, and that is a blended option, which would be a combination, as you see, of both in-person and online. And I'll talk about more details related to that a little further on in the presentation. And then also a significant possibility is starting the year fully online. That is certainly not anyone's first choice, because we would all love to have our kids with us, but the key is safety. What can we do safely? Because we know that our students and our staff deserve that as the #1 priority, in addition to our families, because we truly are all in this together. So when we're looking at this, what are the interrelated factors that impact model selection? And the first is very significant, and that is, will Public Health give us a capacity requirement? Will they tell us you may only use up to 50% capacity within your buildings at any one time? No, I'm saying will they, because these are all things that have been discussed. So they're all things that are on the table, and I don't know the answer to it at this moment. That's why I'm refreshing my news feed. But they may very well tell us that our buildings have to be at a specific capacity requirement. The other issue that is very significant in the discussions related to what is possible is the social distancing requirements. For instance, earlier this summer, in the last week of June even, I believe the phrase 6 feet of distance whenever possible was part of Public Health. Since then, they have removed the phrase whenever possible, and it is now just 6 feet of social distancing. And when you consider that 6 feet is a requirement, then you look at the size of our classrooms, and it becomes very clear in a very short amount of time that the maximum number of students in the average size classroom is potentially 15. So those are very important interrelated factors. In addition to that, Public Health has discussed with superintendents the importance of investigating cohort models, meaning if a group of, let's say, second graders are in a class no larger than 15, then they stay in the classroom. They don't move around the school. They only are with one another. And any instruction that they are receiving is coming to them in the classroom. They don't move, teachers move. And that's part of the cohort model. And then also looking at, particularly for grades 7 through 12, how do we decrease passing times, the number of passing times, or decrease the number of students who are interacting with one another during passing times? These are all important components for contact tracing should we be fortunate enough to be able to open and there was a case of COVID. Facility space is always an issue. And I'll give you an example of that because it's connected to teaching staff. Very often people make wonderful recommendations about other buildings where we may be able to find facility space if we're given a capacity requirement or a social distancing requirement within our schools. And I'm 100% sure there's going to be a social distancing requirement. The issue is whether there'll be a capacity one. But people often recommend, can you investigate this building or that building? While facility space is an issue, particularly at grades 7 and 8, because we know that the middle school, there are a lot of students in that building. So physical space is an issue there. And the other schools is less about physical space and more about teaching staff. If, for instance, we had all of our K-4 buildings at a 1:15 ratio, we could find the rooms. What would be much more difficult is Prairie View would require 6 more teachers, Netherwood 8, Brooklyn 7, and Forest Edge 5. Now there are other models to explore, and we will continue to explore them if we're given the option of being able to operate in a hybrid model. Family needs are always important. Always trying to understand who benefits from solutions and who does not benefit. That's part of always looking at the situation through an equity lens. We are also, as I mentioned previously, trying to coordinate with other Dane County districts. That does not mean that we are doing something just because another district is doing it. It means that we're thoughtfully collaborating because we are interconnected. They have teachers in their districts who have students in our district and vice versa. So it's really important that we're thinking about that also. And finally, our guiding principles. We need to look at all of these interrelated factors and how they impact each of those guiding principles. So today, what is most likely as an option, although honestly, it changes so quickly that it's sometimes very difficult to say most likely. So that is seriously why I'm saying most likely option as of today would be a blended model where our students were in school for a couple of days a week, online a couple of days a week, and 1 day a week would be for teacher collaboration. And that's extremely significant because if we end up in a blended model, it's important to realize that our teachers are then planning to have lessons in person and lessons online. And that is a very difficult task and a heavy load to carry. So if we go in that direction, they will need that extra day of professional collaboration to do that and do that well. And if in a blended option, we examine it and we decide we have greater capacity with either teachers, resources, or rooms, then we would prioritize an in-person model for our youngest students. We would prioritize bringing back more K-4 students if we're in a blended model and we have the ability to bring back more than just the amount that is there in the blended component. And we'll talk a little bit about that in just a little bit, why the younger students, we'll talk about that more later. So, guiding principles, how do we make this decision with all of these interrelated important factors? Well, related to health and safety, we'll look at a few categories. And the first, or the 4 will be physical spaces, healthy environment, daily routines, and transportation. So for physical spaces, I know a lot of you have been doing extensive reading, as have we. If you look at the guidance that we're following, that is where the information related to some of these ideas are coming from. For instance, plexiglass barriers at reception desks. That is something that is an absolute must. Anywhere where people will be standing and conversing in that sense will require that type of barrier. Physical distancing, as I mentioned, of 6 feet is highly likely, Although the American Academy of Pediatrics said you can get an excellent benefit at 3 feet, 6 feet has been what Public Health of Madison-Dane County has been using as their guidance thus far. In order to do that, we will be having to remove some furniture. So I can say that it's, the rooms will probably look a little less cozy, because not only will we be removing furniture, but it's advised from all of the CDC and public health guidance that desks are facing forward, so that they are not talking, students are not talking to one another, and there isn't risk of aerosol distribution sharing. So the desks will look, or the classrooms might look a little bit like they may have looked 40, 50 years ago. Kids in desks facing the front. We will need to do some traffic adjustments, because it's also something to consider related to one-way hallways, so students are not passing one another. And certainly classroom relocations, increased cleaning protocols, staggered use of communal spaces, lots of signage related to the floors and what is 6 feet apart, because particularly our youngest students will have a very hard time understanding that. And so indicators on the floor will be important. Signage regarding hand washing and symptoms. It will also be part of the guidance that we have an identified isolation room for anyone who is showing symptoms. And finally, we need time for staff training, not just on the change in instructional design, but also on all of these health and safety protocols. So that's one of the topics we've been discussing with the OEA, is how do we get people more training time this year before school starts, in order to, if school starts in the same way it has started before, in order to give people an opportunity to learn all that is necessary to make this happen. Related to a healthy environment, once again, you can see there are a lot of things that are on here, including revamping and increasing of cleaning protocols, the fact that we need to think very carefully about any shared objects, and helping students understand the hygiene pieces and taking breaks for hand washing, increased stations around the building. There's also been some work already done related to our ventilation systems. I'm only saying these things for the people who may be watching who have some idea what this means, but Andy assures me that it's good. For instance, we have moved from a MERV 8 to a MERV 13. So that is an increase in the filtration system. They're exploring UVC, UVC within the system also, and ways to increase more outside air coming in. So this is just, and that's just a little bit of, when I asked them for a summary, that's just a smidgen. I'll be able to give more details on that certainly at the staff listening session tomorrow night, because I know there are quite a few questions coming in related to that. Also, we're really, really encouraging people. We will be encouraging people, if we're fortunate enough to be back, to stay home if they're feeling ill. And we need to talk about how to make that happen. And of course, that means that substitutes are also an issue. So we had discussed that substitutes for health and safety reasons must be a priority. Consequently, we will not really be doing anything related to professional development during the school day or meetings during the school day unless it's absolutely necessary, because substitutes must be prioritized for the staff, because if they're not even feeling slightly normal, the safest thing to do is to stay home. And then also Public Health of Madison-Dane County will be giving us a positive case protocol. What exactly do we need to do if there is a positive case within our schools? As you can see, I'm trying very hard not to read it, because you can certainly read it. I'm just doing the high level pieces so that you know what's happening. Related to daily routines, I already spoke a little bit about cohorts. Even before Madison, or Public Health of Madison-Dane County made their mask requirement, we already planned to require masks, because when we're making these decisions, we need to make them based on science. And the science is showing us that masks make a difference. So when you really care about the health and safety of the students, masks need to be a part of it. Of course, we have a separate committee related to food service. It falls underneath operations. And we're looking at not only what can we serve that would allow us to, especially for the younger kids, just hand them their food as opposed to asking them what they want and serving it on a tray. There's going to be all kinds of things that will need to be different, including the high likelihood that our youngest children may be eating lunch in their classroom. We'll be modifying all exits and entrances in order to ensure that students are coming into the building in a way that does not allow them to cluster in any one area. We will have scheduled health breaks. And I would also say that public health told us last week that they're working on protocols for mask breaks, because we know that it may be challenging, particularly for our youngest ones, to keep a mask on for a full school day. Of course, we're looking at creative staffing solutions, but we also are being very mindful of the fact that we want to prioritize ensuring that our students receive the full curricular experience, and that we're not being so creative that we're at this point putting people outside of their licensing area to teach. We will have recess protocols, and it'll be very highly likely that students will be in recess in their cohorts only, and it may be scattered throughout the day. Getting kids outside will be prioritized though, because particularly the first couple of months of school when the weather's good, outside is safe, and outside is probably a lot more fun. So when we can, we will. And of course, as you can imagine, we would be limiting all non-essential visitors to our schools. And then finally, transportation, which is really, a difficult subject to tackle, because even public health in the last meeting admitted there's probably not enough buses in all of Dane County to be able to socially distance on a bus exactly the way we would want to do so. However, there are some things that we can do that public health is recommending, such as assigned seating, 1 student per seat, although siblings certainly can and actually should, when possible, sit together. And students need to stay seated and face the front and keep their mask on. And we all know that's a little difficult. Consequently, we are considering at the moment, could we hire bus supervisors? Because the bus drivers certainly can't pay attention to who's wearing their mask when they're driving our students. So we need to be thinking about that. The buses, of course, will be disinfected after every route. We'll be modifying routes depending on what model we finally land on. And we will be surveying families about who intends to self-transport, because that will actually be helpful. In the past, we really wanted parents to utilize the bus system because we know the traffic jams that happen at schools when everybody's driving. But if we are fortunate enough to be back in the fall, having families transport may actually be a really smart way to go for some families, which of course means we need to modify the pickup and drop off zones because we may be having more traffic than we even do normally. So all of the previous slides were really about how we would like to bring children back into the classroom. Now, when we're talking about high quality instruction, I'll be paying a little more attention to the possibilities of blended and online. So for an in-person model, while having all of our kids back with us safely is, I think, if it can be done safely, that's what everybody would want. But we aren't sure at this moment if it can be done safely. But if it can be, we will prioritize our K-4 students. And we're doing this for a few reasons. It's easier to socially distance the students in the classrooms and in the building due to smaller class sizes at the lower grade levels. We also feel that if we can, increasing the amount of in-person learning time is very helpful in building those foundational skills. And we also know that childcare is a significant challenge for families. And we are absolutely not ignoring that fact in our planning. We also know that many of our staff have young children, and it will be posing childcare challenges for them too. So those are the in-person possibility models. It's unlikely that it would happen for K-12, but if we're fortunate enough to be able to do it safely for our younger students, we would work to do so. So the blended model. This is when we're talking about students attending in person 2 days a week, and we would have them do a virtual for 3. It will be an alphabetical split across the district, and this is very important. It will be alphabetically split to allow families to all attend on the same day, because that might be very helpful in childcare arrangements. If you knew that no matter what school your children went to, they would attend on the same 2 days. We also would make whatever adjustments are necessary when families have different last names, because we know that it won't be an even clean split, and that's okay. We'll make whatever adjustments we need to. The days aren't determined because we'd really like teachers in particular to give us input on what days might be best. A lot of districts are either considering the model where it is cohort A on Monday, Tuesday, students virtual learning on Wednesday and staff collaboration on Wednesday, and then cohort B on Thursday, Friday. Another model that school districts are considering are Monday, Tuesday, cohort A, Wednesday, Thursday, cohort B, and Friday as the collaboration and all students virtual day. As we've mentioned previously, we've already made the decision to ensure we're a one-to-one district should we whether start the school year in a blended or virtual model or be forced into it later in the school year. Either way, our students need devices. That's one of the things we learned this spring with our K-2 students, is that for many of our students, their experience would have been improved had we had devices for them. And internet access is still a challenge, although we are working on it constantly, and we will be continuing to solve problems. But with how large our district is, there are some spots that are very difficult to get the internet to. Staff training's already started. We have classes that are working people through Google tools, online learning best practices. So we're already beginning that process. But as I mentioned, it's really important we give staff more time to prepare for whatever is ahead of them. And as far as I'm just going to mention the staff one more time, really want to be mindful of the childcare challenges that will be presented to our families and to our staff with this model. We know that will happen, that there will be challenges, and we are open to any possible solutions to that, but we know it's there. And we're also really reviewing what we've learned this year from the spring, from our staff, our parents, and our students, and what we're learning for summer school. Because about half of our summer school classes offer synchronous learning. We thought if we piloted synchronous learning during summer school, we'd be able to learn enough to be able to integrate it well in the fall, should we be in a blended or an online model. Which brings us to the last possibility. And that is, there's always the possibility of us being fully online starting right away in the fall, particularly if the numbers in Dane County don't improve significantly. So that means that, while online learning will be offered as an option for families in all online, it will be offered for families in the blended model and in the fully in-person model. In all online learning, that's what all of our teachers will be devoted to, is ensuring that they are offering the best possible distance learning experiences for our students. And really utilizing the staff expertise that was built in the spring and offering more live or synchronous classes. And we will be offering our families an opportunity to select this summer, if indeed this is the option they want, if we are blended or in person. However, I want to make sure people understand that Right now, we are looking into all of our online let's say if we're in person or we're blended, and a family says, no, I really don't feel comfortable sending my child to school for a medical condition or a family member's medical condition. And consequently, if you're going to have any face-to-face instruction at all, I want my child to be in a blended model. We will have that. However, I cannot at this point guarantee that the blended model will be taught 100% by Oregon teachers, because we don't yet know how many of them will be available for teaching in that capacity and how many we need to have teaching in the blended model. So a lot of those things are a little bit up in the air until we have a good idea as to what exactly the model looks like, so staff can start to talk to us about some of the things that need to be discussed, such as if you have a medical condition and you need to request accommodations. Special education and 504 considerations. We know that some of our most fragile learners had a very hard time with an all distance learning model. That was very challenging for them. And so we are looking for ways, if we are forced into an all distance learning model in the fall, due to the data, we're looking for ways to continue to improve our supports for our students who have IEPs and 504s. And I'm sure that we have learned a lot from the spring, but one of the things we learned is that this is very challenging for some students, and we may be, if possible, bringing some very small groups into the building in August to work on some of the skills that may have been lagging. And we know we also have a backlog of paperwork that needs to be completed because students couldn't be tested. So we have things that need to happen, and there are plans. And we know that if we go back into a distance learning model, our teachers were fabulous this spring. They did absolutely everything possible to lead to the best possible outcomes for our students. But there are still some things that will need to be tweaked in order to ensure that we continue to grow and improve what we offer. We also know that there will be some students who really struggle with the mask requirement due to sensory issues, and so we're looking into alternatives. Also, students with hearing impairments. Masks are extremely difficult for them, and consequently, we have ordered several types of masks that have clear plastic fronts so that students would be able to see the mouth move, which is really important for lip reading. So we're experimenting with what type of masks may be appropriate in that situation too. So in addition, we know how important it is to focus on social emotional learning as we begin the new year, because our students have been out of school for a really long time. And we know that there are some students who will need additional supports. And consequently, we will be offering more professional development related to student mental health, trauma, restorative practices, and just general concerns related to returning. And once again, that's another reason why we need some additional time before school starts, because we are not just preparing instructional lessons for students, we're also preparing them to re-enter an environment for what some people might have experienced as an extremely difficult time. So as I mentioned, we'll be working on student preparation, what the day could look like, making sure they understand the expectations of them related to safety. We'll be talking about social emotional health and inclusion and anxiety reduction, having social emotional learning continue to be integrated into universal learning opportunities, and also trying to support our families so that they have a good understanding of what's being discussed at school. An absolutely important priority is also staff wellness, self-care practices, how to support our teachers. No matter what pathway is happening in the fall, this is going to be really challenging, because if you are all virtual yet again, perhaps you are less worried about health, but we also know that the all distance learning environment this spring it was one of those things where before you looked at the clock, you just all of a sudden you realized you had sat in that chair at your kitchen table for 12 hours. And so we know that that was something that teachers definitely struggled sometimes to be able to say, all right, I can't answer any more email today. I need to push my chair away from the table. So we need to figure out ways to make all of it more manageable. And then this is an extremely important part of the plan too, because we know how important athletics and co-curriculars are to our students and are to our families. But one thing that needs to be really clear to everybody is that Public Health of Madison and Dane County has given us some guidance that currently we must adhere to. They have divided sports into low, medium, and high risk. And right now it's really only low risk that can take place. And no matter what takes place, even in practices, students must be socially distanced by 6 feet. That's very difficult to play most sports with 6 feet of social distancing. In addition, sports are held to the 25-person mass gathering limit for outdoor events. So that is something that's really important for all of us to consider, that while there is not at this moment any order that says there are no fall sports, we still must be adhering to 6 feet social distancing and to a 25-person limit for mass gatherings. Mike Carr has been continuing to communicate with coaches, and we will be sending out as much information as we can when we know it. But right now there hasn't been anything definitive other than what I just mentioned related to public health. And once again, we will need to be flexible and adaptable as we move forward. So that's kind of the lead in for the last guiding principle, right? Is that we will need to prepare to be flexible and adapt to new and changing information. For example, back in early mid-March, we were being told that unless we were ill, we shouldn't be wearing masks. And that is only because we learned as this evolved. And we will continue to learn as this situation evolves. And it could very well start off in one model. We get information that pushes us into another model. And we have to be prepared for that, as challenging as that is to even think about. So related to our next steps, and then I'll be ready for questions. We're continuing to work and refine everything based on the guidance. We're eagerly awaiting the guidance and requirements. Tomorrow night is a staff listening session. Staff members have been sending in questions, and I'm holding a session very similar to this where I can answer. And a lot of what I will say we'll have to start off with, we're not sure, because there are a lot of unsureties at the moment, or uncertainties, excuse me. The next day we'll have a staff survey, Wednesday, July 15th. We will have a family listening session on July 16th. And a family survey on July 17th. And we will continue to communicate and update plans as they become more clear. And I really think the clarity is coming within the next couple of weeks. And we hope to be able to give you something more definitive, something to the community that is more definitive by the end of July, the very earliest in the first week of August, because we know how much planning our families and our staff need to do to prepare for whatever is ahead. So now is the portion where I'd really love to hear from you, whether it's in the form of questions or considerations.
Leslie, thank you for just an outstanding presentation. That was just terrifically informative and thorough. Board members, just so you know, we're going to postpone the closed session. That's the one that I'd hoped that we would be able to have tonight if time permitted. But this is such an important topic that Leslie, I asked her to spend as much time as she needed on it. So I think we'll just push that a little bit. We've got time to work on that issue, and we just got material. So just understand that the back end, we're not pressed on that, okay? We have told Leslie, as a board up to this point, that the decision as to how we will proceed for the 2021 school year is one that the administration team led by Leslie would make, and that's not a board decision, but that we would have voice and input into that decision, just because there are so many operational moving factors. If anybody has a problem with that, we need to know that tonight. And I'm going to go through and give everybody an opportunity to ask Leslie questions and to provide her feedback and your thoughts, either personal or what you're hearing from the community, because one thing that Leslie and the administrative team have been doing has been soliciting feedback from everybody. Okay, and the one thing that we know is that there is not going to be a perfect solution that's going to make everybody happy or be the way that we want it. And I've told Leslie that we don't have to be first in terms of a plan. We see a lot of districts coming up with plans already, but we need to have the best plan for the Oregon School District. And as Leslie has said, that will mean that all of us have to be flexible and patient as we move forward, because this changes every day. And as it changes, we need to make sure that we're taking care of our students and our faculty. So that's sort of kind of the preamble. I'm going to go through for each of the board members to give you an opportunity to weigh in on this point in time. And Tim, you're vice president, so you get to go first.
Great, thank you, Steve. And Leslie, thank you so much for a very comprehensive overview. Just as Steve mentioned, I have a couple of larger scale questions and then some smaller ones. I'll just focus on a couple of them. Have we considered, are we considering getting started sooner in order to spread out the content, the education of the content, over a longer period of time? So starting sooner in August, once we've made a decision, once we put a stake in the ground, here's the blended program we're going to launch, for instance. Is there an option to start sooner so that we can spread that content out and not be working people more hours just over a longer period of time?
Well, it's been very difficult to think about starting earlier when we still don't have what it will look like. So that's one of the reasons that we haven't given serious and significant consideration to that fact, is because without knowing what it'll look like, we don't know exactly what type of professional development and what type of preparation the teachers need to make it happen. So if we started earlier, it's probably more likely that we would start earlier with the staff to ensure that they were ready to make all the significant changes that need to happen. However, we have discussed the idea of bringing in our youngest learners for sessions and small group sessions in August. And this is something that we'd like to have more of a discussion with our teachers over. But if you think about it, our little kindergartners have never even been into school. And then they come into school under these really unusual restrictions in this type of unusual environment. So we would like opportunities perhaps to bring in some of our youngest learners early. But when it comes to what's happening in August, I really feel like the teacher learning and planning load will be so heavy that if we get extra days, we should put them in that direction.
Absolutely, that makes good sense. So I appreciate you mentioning that. Secondly, oftentimes companies go out to temp help situations to get them through a bind. You talked about the need, especially if we go to a blended learning model, that we may need more teachers at certain grade levels. Is there an option for us to, for lack of a better term, to purchase commercially available curriculum in a pinch if we need to, as opposed to staffing up? Is that an option?
It is, particularly for the families who select fully online, is that's their primary choice. For that situation, it's highly likely that that is the direction that we would go, that we would purchase curriculum that's offered by companies such as Fuel Education, so that our teachers would be able to, we could ensure that we have teachers who are working on the either face-to-face or the online face-to-face model, because both of those take up so much time. However, what we know to be really important is that even if we outsource some of the online options, we want to be able to still tie that student and that student's progress to an Oregon teacher. So some of what has been discussed is, might we have some teachers who are available to make connections with our fully online students and offer lessons in social emotional learning to supplement the curriculum that we may be purchasing, and even the teachers that often come with that curriculum from online platforms.
Very good. And I know that you alluded to that we would have to have more discussions about whether it's an Oregon-based teacher or something else, particularly when it comes to that online learning process. So that's all I have for now. Thank you, Leslie, again, for all your preparation and for your very comprehensive overview of the options we have.
Great. Troy, you want to jump in, and then Heather, you'll be on deck.
Leslie, welcome to the superintendency.
Thank you.
Wow. Great job, though. I think, this presentation was very well done, and kudos to the admin and teaching staff for preparing for all these uncertainties and these possible models. I think you're doing all that you can do to prepare for all of these uncertainties right now. And I'd also like to say I'm really glad to see that you're doing the listening sessions with both staff and parents. I think that's going to be a really important piece of moving forward. My question kind of goes to what Tim was getting at. I'm curious. I think with either the in-person or the blended models, we simply have to be prepared for some level of our staff being not feeling well and being away from school. And I'm curious if and you presented some numbers of additional staff that would be required, and I think that was relative to decreasing the class sizes. But I'm wondering, do those numbers include reassigning licensed teaching staff that may be performing other roles or other duties within the district? Have you already considered the staff that we have that could be reassigned?
Mm-hmm. It's always a consideration, but nothing we would move forward with until we actually talked with those people. Because we need all of us to be a part of this process. So while if we end up being able to reduce the class sizes and bring in more of our K-4 students, we would probably start prioritizing kindergarten and working our way up, and then thinking about who might be interested, who's already on our staff but has other duties, who might be interested in taking on some of that. I'd really just like that to be a collaborative process if that's the direction we decide to go.
Okay, thank you. My other question is, I guess regarding the blended models. You mentioned an option 2 days in school, 3 days virtual. Have there been discussions about different variations on that? Say a week in school and a week with virtual, or 2 weeks in school and 2 weeks virtual? And if so, what are some of the pros and cons to the changing the duration of that model?
Absolutely. I think all the different possibilities have merit, but one of the things that I know that has been discussed, I believe it was Mr. Pleiner who said it was discussed at the high school leadership team even, and that is how important it is, if possible, to physically see our students every single week, to be able to be in front of them and see how they're doing and have conversations with them. If we can, then we would want to. And if we did an every other week model, I mean, clearly that would mean at least a week at a time would go by before we'd actually be able to physically lay our eyes on our students in a face-to-face way. And, you know, that is a really important part of what schools do, right? We are definitely a safety net for our students. And in some respects, even for some of our families. So if we are fortunate enough to be able to have some of our students with us on some days, I think that seeing them more often, as opposed to spreading it out, would probably be the preference.
Okay, thank you. With that, I'll pass, Steve, on to the next board member and come back with any other questions later.
Okay, Heather, you're up, and Anna, you're on deck.
Great, thanks. Leslie, I'll just echo everybody else's kudos and compliments. Super helpful to see all of this, so thank you. I have a couple questions. My first one is similar to the school schedule that we all went through in the winter and fall. Will we be seeing the options kind of laid out with costs and whatnot when we get to that point to be able to understand what each option will do budget-wise?
Yeah, we can certainly add in, and that would be a little bit of what Andy discusses at the next
right.
But absolutely, we have to think about the costs associated with each of these options. Because as we all know, resources are not unlimited. So that needs to be a factor in the discussion.
Right. Okay. And then you had mentioned, you know, outside time is a good thing, right? Which definitely it is. Obviously, we're limited by weather here in Wisconsin. Has there been any considerations to moving some of this learning outside, especially while we can?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the things that we'll put in our staff survey is, can you imagine places and ways that you could do some of what you do in an outside environment?
Right. Gotcha. I realize there are limitations, but also maybe some really lovely things about it as well. And then it seems like distance learning is happening, right? I mean, in some way, shape, or form. And so I'd be really curious to know for our next update, what, I know you highlighted some of the things, but what are some of are there going to be actual tangibles that, you know, students and families are getting along to supplement kind of this virtual thing so that it isn't necessarily just tablet based? I think a lot about, you know, having an actual book or having and I realize we did some of these things with packets, but just what a more robust kind of tangible virtual thing, if you will, and what that might look like.
That's an excellent point, because John has had several committees working with our teachers to come up with some really great deliverables related to how we can improve distance learning. So if that is indeed what ends up happening, which, as you mentioned, it seems highly likely, then we'll be able to come back with you and give you some real specifics as to the work the committees have done and how we know we can continue to improve the experience.
Okay, yeah, and no doubt that I know people are working on it. I would just be curious to know more when that time comes. And my last question is about the littlest learners. I saw K through 12. How does 4K fit into this?
Well, you bet. Jackie Amlong, our 4K principal, she has a draft one of a plan, and you know, our 4K centers are subject to, it's either, I'm sorry, it's escaping me. They're either subject to childcare or to the public school regulations. And Jackie, if you are on the line and you want to pop right in there, you go right ahead, because we have talked about this, but it's been a couple of weeks and I forgot. So they are subject to public health guidelines also. I'm not sure under which category. So a lot of the things that we're discussing related to cohorts and cleaning and all of those protocols, 4K centers would be subject to those also.
Gotcha, but it's not, I know that it's outsourced, so to speak, so it's not under our jurisdiction. Is that right for this? Got it.
Yes.
Okay, that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Heather. Anna, and then Kevin, you're next.
Muted. Thanks, Steve. This is a lot of information. I am very impressed with all of the facets that have been thought about and looked at and considered. It's an unbelievably challenging situation, and this is just a crazy situation we're all faced with. My initial sort of reaction to all of this is, as much as I love the idea of getting our learners back in schools, I'm very concerned about the blended learning option due to the the demands it's going to put on teachers and staff. And it doesn't really solve necessarily the childcare issue that, you know, is at the forefront for some families who have younger learners who can't be home. And I just see so much the budget number. I'm glad that was a question that Heather brought up, because I feel like when we look at those additional provisions that we are looking to implement to make that blended learning an option, I have to say I'm really skeptical and hesitant for that particular one. And I'm concerned about the position it puts our teachers and staff. So I'm just going to let you know, I'm giving you my honest opinion that I'm just very, very hesitant about that particular option. And so I'm just saying that. As far as, so one of the questions I have related to that is there a way to look at a blended option for, say, our special education students, or those at higher risk, or those who are most vulnerable in this remote learning environment? Obviously, you know, I guess the option would be available to families to choose the fully online option, but it sounds like that may not include necessarily the same type of virtual learning that we had in the spring. So I think that's going to be important to make that very clear, what that looks like and what that might mean, because I think families might choose differently if it's something different than what they experienced in the spring. So I just think we should make that very clear what that looks like and means, so families know going into it what that might entail. So those are some of my immediate thoughts, comments, and reactions to this information, and I do not envy this situation for any of us. There's not an easy, good solution in my opinion right now.
I completely agree. And just for the sake of anybody who's watching, I want to make sure that if you're watching, it's very clear that the virtual option that parents would select would be offered if we were fully in person or if we were blended. If as a school district, we start the year in a distance learning format, we wouldn't offer a separate virtual learning piece. We would just all be together in that format. So if anyone's watching and they're wondering, I just want to make sure that piece is clear, and we'll also make sure it's very clear in the survey to families, so families have some idea of what they may be opting into.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Kevin.
Yeah, let me start by reiterating what all the other board members have said, Leslie, about the amazing work. I'm sure you had input from a lot of your staff on the presentation. And, you know, I've been thinking about my 250 employees and some of the parallels, and hearing now your presentation. There's certainly some things that, you know, I could share in terms of what we've learned, because we've had our essential workers working since March and have been blessed so far to have only a few actually recent examples of some exposure. But we don't have employees, as far as I can see, going down hallways and, you know, not keeping their hands to each other and things like that. So it's, you know, I'm just thinking of that whole scenario of passing out in hallways or in schools and not being able to keep their hands, and young kids trying to keep masks on. And it just blows my mind how complicated this is. So I certainly realize how complicated it is. I have kind of a big picture question, I mean, we could certainly debate what's best. I mean, my personal preference is to try to get, obviously taking safety of our staff and the kids at the top of the list, but trying to get the kids as much back to school as possible is certainly my personal preference. How much of this is just, in your opinion, again, it's conjecture, but how much of this, in your opinion, do you think will be dictated to us, especially in Dane County? Meaning, so I'll ask my employees often like a scale of 1 to 5, meaning 1, we're going to determine it all ourselves. 5, more than likely, we're going to be told what to do. Don't mean to put you on the spot, but if you, in your personal opinion, could answer that question.
Sure. Public health won't tell us what instructional model to use, but there may be some instructional models that become our only option by default based on what they say. For instance, if they say that you can only use 50% capacity of your building, then our only true option is blended. Now we can talk about how to make that happen, but as far as bringing students back, if they said 50% capacity, that would be the only option.
Yes.
So they won't tell us how to do it, but they will be giving us parameters that will push us in one direction or another.
Makes sense. So, you know, with my boys, I have 4 boys and I have a unique perspective because I have twins that are 10, and frankly in the virtual, and again, I know everything was done to try to make it as successful as it, let's say it's blindsided the whole nation to a certain extent, and we all did the best we could in terms of making it as good of a learning environment as possible. But, you know, on the young end, my 10-year-olds maybe weren't challenged very much. On the other end, my oldest son actually is an IEP, which I'm not afraid to share. And, you know, the teachers at Oregon have been unbelievable for him. So I kind of see the both ends of the spectrum of the challenges that my boys have gone through. And I know, especially on, you know, our kids that are on IEPs and programs like that, that in-person thing is just so critical. So that's an additional challenge, and more of a statement, less of a question. But I guess the question I have, even in a blended environment or 100% virtual environment, what can we do, or what can the teachers do to make it much more interactive? Meaning classes that are taught live and not, here's your assignments for the week, if you need me, check in, because I think that was a huge challenge with virtual learning. And that, you know, again, it was a different scenario. We've had more time to plan, but will we be more prepared to do, kind of call it more of a, I know you mentioned it on your slides, more live learning?
Yes, we would like to find ways to integrate more synchronous learning into the experience for the exact reason you mentioned, but also ensure that if our students aren't able to access it at a certain time because of a family commitment, that there's a way for them to access it later. But that's one of the things I think we learned from the spring, is that a good portion of our kids absolutely have to have that face-to-face.
Yeah, it's a huge issue. And I guess the last comment I'd say before I pass the baton here is, and this has been considered because we talked about childcare issues, but as I think about the 2-day on, you know, Wednesday and then 2 days off, call it off, meaning virtual, not in the school, I just think about the people that work for our company in terms of how they manage that, you know, and it is what it is. We'll have to figure out a way, as we did, you know, at the end of last school year, but it's really challenging. And the week on, week off is another, you know, challenge, same kind of scenario, different timing. But I just think of the challenges that are going to, you know, then roll themselves into, you know, our work environments. And, but so just another comment, less of a question, but.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Krista.
Thanks, Steve. I just have a couple comments and then just a couple questions and maybe a point of consideration. One, I kind of want to review things that I heard you say. Mm-hmm. One was that we're all on the same team, and I think that's a really important thing for people to hear. There's a narrative out there that it needs to be parents versus teachers, or teachers versus administration. We're all in this together, and what I saw from you clearly illustrates you are asking people for opinions, you are bringing people into the fold, you are open to hear suggestions and points of consideration. So thank you for doing that. That's not every district across the county, and it's not every district across the nation. That you are stellar in that regard, that you are not afraid to hear feedback or ask for opinions, and it's a work in progress. So thank you very much for that. Second, we pride ourselves as a district that we offer students and families voice and choice. I think you've presented a plan that gives people, based on their situation, based on their children, based on their life, they've got choice and voice in this option. And again, that's a really important thing, and that's a landmark of the Oregon School District. Third, which is really important to me, is that we take the long view in this. This is not just about this semester. It's about, if we get our kids back in school, we want them to stay. We don't want to start this, then have to stop, and then have to start, and then have to stop again. That's not healthy. So I really appreciate that. I think you're taking the long view and looking at a lot of sources. Fourth is forward thinking. We have a paper called The Path Forward, and so I would really encourage you, which you've done, and for the board to really think about, what are the lessons that we can learn from this going forward about what we envision an Oregon School District education to be, and maybe we haven't been able to get there, but this is an environment for us to try things based on things that we know we want to do as a district. So that's more to my fellow board members, that we keep an eye on this situation and where we want to go, so that if we get through it, we're not reverting back to things, that this is really where we wanted to go in terms of individual learning plans and individual abilities and how kids learn and how teachers teach. So those are just kind of a couple of my thoughts before you ask for points of consideration. My couple questions are about one thing that I heard and saw in the spring was engagement, that we were presenting things, but we were having families and students or parents having a lot of anxiety about engaging their kids.
Yes.
And so one thing that I would ask for a point of consideration is maybe a committee that's missing is community partnership. That staff does not have to carry the load of this whole situation. We had mentor programs that we started at RCI. Are there roles for community members to help staff with kids being engaged? That teachers teach, but mentors and parent volunteers have been a critical part of the school district. And so can we look at the potential for community partnership in that area? And then also the childcare. So we know that that's going to be an issue. So let's solve that issue. Can the community play a role if we go to a blended model that helps come up with solutions about childcare? So I guess I'm just asking, your opinion on potentially a community partnership committee or some thought process about how the community can help solve some of the issues that we know are going to be there based on the situation we're in.
Thank you. I think both are viable possibilities. It could even be the same committee.
And again, I'm not saying that you have to do that, but that just might be a consideration of how you want to get help, because you all have a lot on your plate, and that could be somebody that funnels options to you.
Thank you.
I'm really, really impressed, Leslie. Thank you so much. And we are so fortunate to have you in this spot at this time. That's all for me.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say. But what's really important that I want to be able to say tonight, I hope there's a ton of people hearing this, is that we are, as I said earlier, we are all a team. All the district office administrators, the principals, the teachers, the OEA leadership, we've all been working together, meeting regularly and talking about the issues that we know are super important. And none of what you just saw could be anything without all of those people giving their input. So I just want to make sure there's a little shout out to all of the people who are making this happen.
Thank you. I've just got a couple points. I'm going to reiterate Krista's point about the long view and the long play, and that our decision making isn't about September 1st. It's about forever in this district, and how we handle not only the near-term challenges that COVID-19 present, but the ongoing challenges based upon what's happened in the last year in terms of bringing students back up to speed and working with the kids who have been impacted in the last year and will be this year. Leslie and I had a chance to talk during the day today, and we were talking about, from a historical perspective, every generation pretty much has had significant disruptive times in the life of the nation where things fundamentally changed, and weren't normal. And we can't look at the solution to this as this box is the one I prefer, and this box is the one I prefer, and this box is the one I prefer, based upon the boxes that we've had before, because they're not relevant anymore. They won't be for this year. They shouldn't be in the future. We need to learn from this and drive the path forward from this. And so as you're contemplating the solutions to this, and they're not going to be perfect, I really implore you to look at the long view, to not try to fit our solution into pre-existing boxes, but to create our new system and how that looks, both in terms of addressing short-term needs and the long-term interests in our educators with that. Not one size is going to fit all. And I think that's one of the things that we have learned over the last 10 to 12 years of individualized learning, is that while we thought we had a great model for individualized learning and how to go, some kids needed structure, some kids didn't, and we had to work within different models. And so I just think that the model in the future is going to be that multivariate, multi-form sort of system as we go forward. And so I'd like for you guys to just work on that. And then kind of as a prelude into our budget update thing, I've always been cognizant of the impact that COVID-19 is going to have on this district financially, and districts across the state, in the next 3 to 4 years in terms of funding, and was trying to look for ways to utilize whatever savings we had this year, perhaps if we could, to create a buffer for funding in the future. The more and more that I hear and see from you about what's going to be needed, I'm more inclined, as we talk about those, is if we need resources to move into the next year and the next 2 years, that we find a way to do that. So those are my thoughts. Leslie, did that, our discussion, prompt anything that you need to speak to or would like to address?
No, I think that people offered some really important points of consideration, and I'll be taking it back to the district office steering committee. And I'm really eager to hear from
countries, and they're ahead of us in terms of what's working, what's not working. Has that been shared amongst the teacher community, whatever that looks like, out of curiosity?
Well, I know that I personally haven't shared any articles related to schools reopening in Europe with teachers. However, one thing that I have taken away from my personal reading of those articles is that I love the idea of what can we learn about what they did in their classrooms instructionally. That would be tremendous. But it's hard to compare because the European countries opened their schools when their numbers were going down.
Okay.
We're talking about opening schools when our numbers are going up. And that's where it's
Yeah. Well, I know there's some hybrids, like in Sweden. I was talking to someone today, and they actually K through 10, and again, different scenario, different, bikes and what have you. K through 10 in school, 10 through 12 is actually 100% virtual because it's easier to do. So it's just, I know there's a lot of things that I'm trying to already, and you see with classrooms with, plexiglass dividers and all kinds of stuff. I was just curious if there's information out there that people have shared.
John may have tackled that a little bit in some of his facilitated committees related to academic planning. So I'll inquire with him, and we'll see if there's anything we can build upon.
Thank you.
Anything else, Kevin? Thanks. You good? Okay. Krista, you good?
I'm good.
I'm good too. So that wraps up a really excellent presentation. Leslie, thanks for emphasizing everybody the team aspect of this decision-making process. This takes us to the 2020-21 budget update. Andy, that's yours.
It is. This will be relatively short. The main focus of this presentation is really about the amount of money that we think we would have left over from last year. Got to be careful of our wording right now because, as we talked about before, July 1st is our new fiscal year. So technically, we are already in new school year. But from last year, in the 1920 school year, we were anticipating approximately somewhere in that $1.3 million, $1.2 to $1.3 million revenue for tablets and Chromebooks, so that we will have a one-to-one share other resources that in the past the board has been willing for us to look at. Fund balance is not a big savings account. It is really the way that we cash flow our year for the most part. And there's some accounting things that happen in there too that related to non-spendable funds related to trust accounts and property. But there is a significant amount of money in there that could be utilized to help us cash flow if there are needs that we have outside of that. And then the third thing that I just wanted to mention is we haven't yet approved increases for any employee groups. And part of this will be really determined based on how the state of Wisconsin responds to their revenue shortfalls that they're starting to right now get a handle on, just to be able to react to some of the needs that we've identified. So nothing more really than that I wanted to share tonight, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
Andy, I have a quick question.
Go, Tim.
I know that we always have a safety net line of credit available to us, a borrowing line that we typically don't use because we have access to our fund balance for those cash flow needs. Should we take a fresh look at that in the event that we need to use a little bit more of our fund balance than we are typically used to, so that we still have access to cash just for cash flow needs, just for timing? Should we be looking at something a little bit larger just in the event we have to cash flow things differently this year?
For sure. That would be depending on how the next month or two goes. I think that is absolutely something that we might need to look at. Typically, our low months are the end of November, so we do have a few months to be able to react to those things. There are some other things that have happened, but we've anticipated them and should be fine earlier in the year. Some of our municipalities have actually postponed collecting property tax revenue, and they've let us know that. But we think we can still get to that November timeline when cash becomes a little bit tight for us. So I think depending on what the plan is in the next month or two, that would absolutely be a good idea, Tim, to look at those things and establish that line of credit and perhaps make it larger than it has been in the past.
Yeah, good. It's as you know, it's always easier to borrow money when you least need it. And so, as opposed to waiting, till later in the year, it would be good just to have something again when we least need it, when we have strong fund balances. Is not a bad time to be asking.
Absolutely.
Anything more, Tim?
No, that's it.
Krista, anything?
Andy, remind me, what is kind of a general rule of thumb in terms of percentage of our budget that should be in on our fund balance, our reserves?
Sometimes people use the 25% number, but it really depends on where people are in the state aid formula. If you look at DPI, they actually have given guidance. They actually, I don't know if they copied us, but they came up with their guidance after we came up with our policy, which basically was we just want to have enough money in the fund balance in order to cash flow throughout the year. Mm-hmm. And that, like I said before, really depends on the school district and where they are in the state aid formula. So some districts might be heavily aided, state aided. And because of that, they need more cash flow because the state doesn't, they need more cash resources because the state doesn't normally fund them as well as others. Other districts might have that are more property reliant on property taxes. They have more reliable funding sources throughout the year and are in a better situation. We're kind of in the situation where we're half and half. So it really depends on the district, but DPI's guidance is basically so you cash flow yourself for the entire year.
I guess the only other thought I have is with 3 in terms of holding back compensation increases, I just have a concern given, I understand where we are financially, but given what we are asking our staff to do this year, it's going to be a really hard pill to swallow. And so I just want to be cognizant of that and as a board really think about that.
My comments weren't based on advocating. It was simply so that you knew that that was out there, that
Yeah.
we hadn't done it yet.
Yeah, and I'm just saying that, you know, that might be to Steve's comment earlier, but I really think we need to think about that.
Kevin? Anything for
I'm
Andy?
good.
Okay,
I'm good.
Anna, are you good? Or you have anything? Okay, Troy?
Nothing from me.
Heather?
I'm good, thanks.
Yep. I'm good as well. And I've talked with Leslie about the roles of administration versus board on that. And I told her that when we start getting into these money decisions with respect to the fund balance, that the board plays some role in that a little more closely than picking the model, just because there's so many variables over there, and it involves our fund balance policy as well, which was within the board's lane. So just so you know, when we're talking about lanes, the money lane starts wandering into our sum. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. That takes us to Worth Woods, and we were just going to do an update on that. Leslie, do you have anything on that, or is that Andy? Or I know I had just something to talk about that, but I wanted to know whether you guys had anything additional.
I don't think so. If you'd like to talk first, perhaps we can supplement based on what
Great.
you're saying.
I know we had an update. We're set to close maybe this week on the Merritt Map property.
Yes.
With that, okay, and things are in process with respect to Worth Woods as well, just getting to CSM and that together. I've been talking with Leslie about the various things that need coordinating with both the environmental center and with Worth Woods, and so you guys should have gotten kind of my thoughts in terms of what that could look like. This is not an action item tonight, it's just for your review, but the administration has so much going on right now, and there's some immediate needs for coordination out there in the next 2 or 3 months that I thought having an ad hoc committee that would work with administration to look at the various functions and things that need to be done with that property might be beneficial. And so contemplating an ad hoc committee that would not be a permanent committee. We would, have that in place for an undetermined period of time with 3 committee members or 3 board members that overlook. I think there are 3 functions out there. One would be the environmental center. Andy and Zach are already working on security and some of the immediate infrastructure needs, but what would rehab and restoration look like, and can we get in-kind donations out there to do that, and who would be in charge of doing that, and then long-term booking and access and budget issues. With respect to the woods, I know that Megan Konopacki's been working with a group of people to put together a management plan, and our agreement for the sale contemplates having the district develop a plan and how that would get accomplished and funded. And then there would be volunteers that would have to, I think would play a role in that. So that's a lane that, could be a subcommittee. There would be a curricular component, and that would not be something that the board would be involved, but it's part of that overall process. And then, we need to talk about the fundraising component of that and whether or not to create a separate 501c3 or utilize a district account for the fundraising and solicitation and the grant monies that go into that. And I think that would be a function of that committee as well. I know I've already had 3 communications about willingness to contribute to developing the environmental center in the woods. So I think that stuff's in the near term, and recognizing that all of this is really not the first priority of the district, but there are some ongoing needs that we have to address. And I think an ad hoc committee might be appropriate, even though that's a little bit different than our lane discussion of operational versus policy oversight, envisioning that for a short term, this might serve a healthy purpose. So any reaction to that? Pretty quiet.
I just think that's a great high level oversight, thought about it, Steve. I think, as you mentioned, I think we've got some bigger fish to fry at the moment. But I think dividing things up and kind of spreading the load a little bit in a number of different ways is a great way to look at it.
Right. Okay. And the intent wasn't, by creating a committee, is not to say that we're taking over administration's role in this. That's not it at all. It's just to provide kind of a board oversight over a lot of those different lanes and working with administrators in each of those lanes with that as we go through. So, and actually, Tim, I was thinking maybe I would ask you to chair that committee. But you don't have to.
I'd be happy to participate for sure.
If we go that route, so that's food for thought. Board members, if you have thoughts that you want to share offline with me about this, do that. I just wanted to put it on the table right now, as we move forward to get that in place. Because as much as, we need to solve the other problems, we're going to have continuing other operational stuff that needs to be done in the district, and this is one of them. Okay. Anybody have any comments? Okay. I'm not hearing any, so be in touch, and then I will work with Leslie. I want to get her feedback and the administrative team's feedback on that as well. So, good. We're not going to do our closed session tonight. I think we can do that at a special 1 hour meeting of the board at some point, and I'll reach out to you guys to talk about that. I think it would be better fit for that type of session anyway in the next 6 weeks. So that takes us to future agenda. Leslie and I we've got our July 27th meeting, and that agenda is going to be coming out to you guys, and we're going to have homework for that. And so really critical meeting to plan out our next year and our priorities. And then, as I indicated, you're going to be getting a Google poll for available dates so that if we need one, we can plug one in for everybody, depending on how things move. I think flexibility is going to be the key for us over the next 6 weeks. So that's the future agenda. Superintendent report. Leslie, anything from you now?
Just a couple of things. The graduation video that's currently being put together will be released to families on July 25th. So Mr. Planner will be sending out information to families on how to access that video so they can have an at-home celebration. And on July 28th, we are having a virtual event with Nehemiah called Why Talk About Racism. This is a free event, and people may register at the link that's on the Oregon School District website. So on the very first page, we hope as many people come as we can possibly manage, because this is a super important topic, and we really appreciate our partnership with Nehemiah and want to learn as much as we can together as a community. And speaking of that, we do have about 40 community and members / staff members who are taking part in the All-Dane County read of the White Racial Frame. There are 400 people across Dane County who are working, thank you, Steve, who are reading that book. And that is now the book that the school board has selected as a read for them in first semester. I also just want to mention, Andy, you can correct me, but we may be getting Forest Edge occupancy in the next couple of weeks. Is that correct?
Try the next 48 hours.
Wow.
All right, guys.
Wow.
So that is awesome. Really exciting. I was afraid of overstating by even saying next week. So 48 hours is amazing. And we'll be seeing some of you this week for tours, I believe, Tuesday and Thursday, for physically distanced, social, appropriate according to public health guidance tours. So that'll be good, Tuesday night and Thursday night. Other than that, I just want to also mention that I was fortunate enough to attend the Friends of Oregon School District annual meeting. And it was a really excellent summary of all the good work that was done this past year for our students in Oregon, and how much the community has benefited from the hard work of the members of that amazing partnership. So many thanks to Friends of Oregon School District, and many thanks to Ms. Flanagan, who's a really integral member of the group. And that concludes the superintendent's report for today.
Great, thank you, Leslie. That takes us to check out for the board. Troy, anything?
No, nothing from me.
Tim?
No, nothing for me.
Kevin?
No, sir, I'm good.
Heather?
All set, thanks.
Anna?
I don't have anything. Thank you.
Krista?
I'm good.
Excellent meeting, everyone. Thank you so much, Leslie. I'll entertain one more motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Did you get that, Katie? You get to pick.
Give it to Kevin. He rarely does it.
Yeah, exactly. I finally got one.
Like Jeopardy.
Yeah.
Who got the second?
Me, Anna.
Anna got second. Okay, that's the motion to adjourn. Katie, would you call the roll on that?
Mr. Maring,
Yes.
Ms. Bijak,
Yes.
Ms. Garrison,
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan,
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz.